Late Friday night, Democrats and Republicans in Washington made a compromise to prevent a government shutdown, but in the next few weeks, they'll have to compromise at least once again, and this time the stakes will be much higher. One reason is the agreement will affect a much larger amount of federal money over several years. The other reason is a failure to compromise will do much more serious damage to the economy. So far, by many accounts, most of the hard figures about what needs to be done are coming from Republicans, most notably Congressman Paul Ryan, but other figures are supported by other factions, including the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And joining us with some thoughts on the budget questions is our guest from United for a Fair Economy, the Federal Tax Policy Coordinator, Lee Farris. Thank you very much for being with us, Lee. First of all, tell us about what's been going on here, because most of us know for sure that, well, the government didn't shut down, so we're breathing easier. But
I think it's a really great thing that the government didn't shut down, because the government working is important to all of us. One of the consequences, or some of the consequences, if the government had shut down, is soldiers would not have been paid on time, people who retired would not have been able to apply for Social Security, people who newly became disabled or sick and needing help from Medicaid, they would not have been able to apply for help. So there's all sorts of things that our government does for us that we don't even think about in the day-to-day, but they're really, really important. And so having a government that's effective and smooth is really important to all of us. And we need our leaders, once we vote for them and elect them, we need them to be able to negotiate with each other even through differences. And they should be able to come to an agreement on 6 months of spending in the federal government without shutting it down. And they did at the last minute. But interestingly, as I was reading just before I came over here, they're still ironing out the fine details of what it is that they agreed on. They did agree on cutting about $38 billion from the remainder of this year. And the problem with cutting spending right now, we all know that there's a huge government deficit, and that's a problem for all of us, because it means that something like 8 cents on every tax dollar that we spend is just paying interest on the debt. So that's wasted money at this point. It would be nice if we could make that smaller. But the problem with cutting government spending when we are still in the middle of this big recession with huge amounts of unemployment is government spending helps the economy not fall even farther. And if we don't spend some now, then we're going to lose more jobs. So the problem with cutting spending right now is it's not the right time. And we do need to cut we need to get our revenues in alignment with what we're spending, but United for a Fair Economy thinks that what we really need to be doing is returning to levels of taxation that we had under President Clinton and under some other presidents before that, instead of continuing with the tax cuts for the wealthy that we've had under President Bush.
Talk about the sense of alarm out there, because you can't do something this drastic in such a short time without a sense of alarm. There are other countries in the world, the developed world, who have government spending problems. They had to be more or less bailed out. They're taking these extreme austerity measures, and everybody says, well, they have to do that. And you look at our numbers, they're astronomical by comparison. So don't we have to do something pretty drastic?
Yes, but is the question, we do have to do something big, but the question is, when do we have to do it, and which way do we do it? Do we do it by cutting spending, or do we do it by raising revenue? And we have a much lower tax rate on both individuals and corporations in this country than most other developed nations have. And that means that if we want to have the kind of government services that we've been counting on all these years, Social Security, Medicare that pays for almost everything when you're old and sick, things like that, we have to be willing to spend the money to have the things that we are counting on. And right now, our revenues are not matching what we're spending. That's for sure true.
The next agreement on the horizon is about what happens after the current fiscal year. Some big cuts being talked about. We're hearing a lot about Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, And is there anything else he can do?
To balance the budget?
To balance, at least get closer to balance without taking a big bite out of those?
Well, there is a progressive budget proposal out there from the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and it has a lot of revenue coming from greater taxation on corporations and greater taxation on the wealthiest individuals. So for example, right now, you have people that earn $350,000 a year are being taxed at the same level as Warren Buffett. That doesn't make sense. And so this budget proposal includes a new tax bracket for millionaires, and then a few in between on up to a new tax bracket for billionaires. And they would be taxed substantially more. And with that revenue, if you change the balance of how much the very wealthiest people in our society are getting taxed, you can have a balanced budget within a few years. They've shown that you can do it. Now, there's a whole nother way to do it than anybody is talking about, in other words.
This debate's been going on for a while about taxing the rich essentially, or taxing the corporations more, and the argument against it is usually that more taxes mean that there will be less investment of that money here, or that they'll just look for other ways to avoid paying taxes.
It's true that there will be some tax avoidance. There is already quite a substantial amount of tax avoidance by the wealthiest people and by the largest multinational corporations. But it's also true that if you say things like the new movement US Uncut is calling for, they're saying if you show a profit in the United States, you should pay taxes in the United States. Well, that's pretty simple for everybody to understand. There's many corporations like Bank of America, GE, and other large companies, Wells Fargo, that are showing profits in the United States, but they are cooking their books in ways that now are legal but could be very easily made illegal. And then they would have to pay taxes on what they earn in the United States. Similarly, with wealthy individuals, at a certain point, if they want to not pay U.S. Taxes, they would have to renounce their citizenship. And that's a pretty big price to pay that most wealthy people are not willing to pay because, I should say my organization has, United for a Fair Economy, has a project called Responsible Wealth that is composed of more than 700 wealthy people, all of whom, some of whom are business people, some made the money themselves, some inherited the money. All of them are saying that they should pay higher taxes. And it usually blows people's minds when they hear that there is a whole group of wealthy people saying, raise my taxes. And they're saying that some of them are paying taxes at a rate as low as like 6%, and they're earning hundreds of thousands a year, and they're not breaking the law.
Finally,
so that's what needs to get changed is where there are different rates so people will follow the law. I think most wealthy people, like most average Americans, want to follow the tax law. And if we change the law, then they will follow it.
Finally, the politics around this. Republicans have a lot of power to skew things in their direction in Congress, even in the Senate. So where does that leave Obama? What can he do except veto whatever gets passed, and then we have a crisis?
Well, I think the thing that President Obama has not been doing that he could be doing more of is talking to the American public, having the conversation that we are having, explaining things to people, explaining that when you are in the middle of an economic crisis, it's not the right time to cut government spending. But what we need to do now is make a plan for how we are going to balance our revenue and our spending. That is what we need to do now. And making those kinds of distinctions and helping people understand how the federal budget works and the way that it's not the same as our personal individual budget is exactly the kind of thing he could be doing if he helped people understand things more. Then I think they would be putting pressure on their elected representatives. What we're looking at is the Republicans are proposing in their budget to end Medicare as we know it, to chop very substantially Medicaid. So these are not politically viable proposals, but there needs to be a real understanding of what the impact on these Republican proposals would be for individuals. And when individuals are aware of the level of changes that's being proposed, I think they're going to feel very differently. The other thing I would say is Americans already support taxing the wealthy. It's like 81% support for higher taxes on the wealthy before there's asking for cutting programs that would hurt working and middle Americans, or for raising the taxes on middle and working Americans. So let's do the stuff that people agree on first and start turning the boat, and then we'll see if we need to end up asking for more sacrifice from middle income folks. But we're the ones that paid the taxes that bailed out Wall Street after they screwed things up. Why should we be the ones that now, after a decade of Bush tax cuts that cost trillions of dollars of debt, that were none of which were paid for, and the tax cuts largely benefited the wealthiest people, why should we be the ones to have our Social Security cut, to have our kids' education cut, to have Medicaid cut, before asking corporations and wealthy to step up to the plate and do their fair share?
Thank you very much for being with us. From United for a Fair Economy, Lee Faris. We'll have more news after this message.